So, what is it we need to make a really good cup of tea? Well, one of the most important things is you need boiling water. But what do we mean by boiling water? Well, in this case, I mean water that boils at 100 degrees centigrade. And it's this which is the problem about trying to make tea at the top of Mount Everest. What I'm going to try and do today is to show you whether I can get water to boil at much lower temperatures. So to help me with this experiment, I'm going to need the vacuum pump again, which I've got over here. And I've also got a flask with a hose pipe attached to it. And what I'm going to do is connect it to the vacuum pump, and I'm going to extract the air from it. So I'll connect that to the port on the vacuum pump, switch on, and slowly but surely it will evacuate the air from this round bottom flask. Takes a little bit of time. And then when I think I've got a really good vacuum, I'm just going to seal that in the flask with this clip by squeezing the hose. So no air can get in now. Switch off the vacuum pump. Take the hose off and put it underwater. So if you remember, we've got a vacuum in this flask, and let's see what happens when we open up the clip. Now, I don't know if you noticed there, but the water rushed in, and also there was an awful lot of bubbling going on. I'd like to show you that experiment one more time, and then we can actually explain it. So I've pumped down the flask again. Let's quickly stick it into the water and look carefully at what happens in the flask as soon as we open it up. So you will have seen the water rushing in there, but also you should have seen an awful lot of bubbling. And remember that I've got the hose underwater at all times, so I wasn't bringing any air into the system whatsoever. There might have been a tiny bit of dissolved oxygen in the water and dissolved gases, but those bubbles you saw was the water actually boiling in this flask. And what I normally do at this stage is pretend that it's extremely hot, and I sort of gingerly hold it and offer to pass it around to my students. And those that know will realise that this water was actually boiling at room temperature. And in fact, it doesn't feel any warmer than it did when I got it out of the tap a few minutes ago. So, time for an explanation. If you remember, we were asking ourselves the question, can you make a good cup of tea on the top of Mount Everest? Well, I've never been there. I've been near in Nepal, but I've never been to the top of Mount Everest. But the joy of physics is it allows you to make predictions. One thing that's really crucial when you make a cup of tea is the temperature of the water. And you boil the kettle, and when I made the tea earlier, I boiled the kettle to 100 degrees centigrade, and it was probably on the tea bag at about 90 to 95 degrees centigrade, which is a good temperature to get the flavour out of the tea bag. But what happens if water boils at a lower temperature? And the experiment with the vacuum indicated just that we currently sit at the bottom of the atmosphere. So the water in this beaker is not really boiling. There's a huge pressure of the atmosphere on top, and any particles that would like to escape from the surface are finding it extremely difficult to do because of the weight and pressure of air on top. But what happens if we remove that atmosphere and we have no pressure on top of the water? Then any of the particles that are on the top that are moving upwards immediately disappear from the surface, leave another surface that's lower down, and those particles can then leave the surface. They're going very fast anyway, it's just they're being kept down in the liquid form because of the pressure of the atmosphere. But in the flask where we had a vacuum, there was no pressure in there, so the particles could leave the surface very, very quickly and boil. So what they did is they all left the surface of the water as they entered the vacuum and disappeared off into a gas to begin with, and that's why you saw the bubbles, and therefore were boiling at room temperature, which today is about 20 degrees C. At the top of Mount Everest, the atmospheric pressure might be such that you find that water boils at a much lower temperature. And if it boils at a temperature that is lower than that needed to make a good quality cup of tea and to get the flavour out of the tea bag, you're never going to make a nice cup of tea at all. The atmospheric pressure is just too low and the water boils at too low a temperature. So I hope you enjoyed that experiment, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.